Welcome back. This is going to be the final part in the series. It's part 7 or 8, depending on how we're counting it. And now that we've figured out, hopefully after spending an hour at least on that last video, we've figured out more or less how E. Michael Jones thinks about race and why he thinks like he does. We're going to see how much trouble you can get into when you're stuck on a viewpoint that is wrong, that is incorrect, that is unsustainable, that requires you to look past a mountain of evidence in order to continue to hold your position. Something that you're too smart to hold this position, but you're just stuck on it anyway and can't move. So obviously this is going to create problems for you, and it does for him. So we're going to look at this book called Ethnos Needs Logos from 2015, I think. Why I spent 3 days in Guadalajara trying to persuade Diego Duque to become a Catholic. You might have guessed that's not a real person's name. Had to change it to try to skip the YouTube censors. Really don't want to bring them down on us any more than they're already going to come down on us. So just to figure out what he's up to in this book, let's start here. If there were ever a country that was the opposite of Nazi Germany and the Ku Klux Klan, it is Mexico. Well, I replaced one Hortler but forgot the second one. Good job. Hortler promoted racial purity. Mexico is based on race mixing. That's quite a claim, wouldn't you say? As Jose Alberto Villasana pointed out in his explanation of the image on the tilma in his talk on the history of Mexico, Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared as a mestiza, conferring on the Mexican nation its status as the capital of race mixing. As I'm leaving the hall during a break to bask in the warm Mexican sun, a man takes me aside and tells me that Mexicans are the cosmic race. The term comes from Vasconel, and it refers to what the Klan would refer to disparagingly as race mixing. In addition to being the capital of race mixing, Mexico is also a nation that could not possibly implement the separation of church and state because it is a country that was founded by the Blessed Mother. No one can understand the real, as opposed to the Masonic, Mexico, without an understanding of the role which Our Lady of Guadalupe played in the creation of the Mexican nation. And so he's going to go on here to talk about the the Catholic historical narrative about the conquest of Mexico, which is that you have some conquistadors, which are essentially good, brave guys, and they destroy an evil, demon-worshipping cult that was subjugating the surrounding area and, executing hundreds of thousands of people a year and sacrificing them to demons. Okay. Now, the Virgin of Guadalupe herself is originally from Spain, not from Mexico. She was a Marian apparition from Spain. The history goes back pretty far on that, and she was specifically, I think, an anti-Islam or anti-Muslim orientation. We may talk about that in a little bit, but then she makes another appearance in Mexico. She appears to a native Mexica, Aztec, I don't know what you'd call them, an indigenous Mexican person, and she is the go-between for this indigenous Mexican person and the local Spanish bishop. So that's her historical context, and when she appears, she blasts her image onto the cape or cloak that this indigenous Mexican man was wearing. So if you go to Mexico City and you see the Virgin of Guadalupe today, the relic that you're looking at is the product, according to Catholic belief, Catholic tradition, it's the product of the Marian apparition. So she appeared 3 times, she created this image, and the way that this image spoke to the Mexican indigenes caused a massive wave of conversions that over, I guess, over a period of 10 or 20 years, they had, something like 10 million of these indigenous Mexican people convert to Catholicism. And so that's the traditional narrative. The traditional narrative doesn't have a damn thing to do with race mixing. The traditional narrative is that you have the Spanish bishop, the indigenous man, and the virgin. Her appearance in this relic that she creates starts a gigantic wave of mass conversions, and that is the basis of Mexico, rather than race mixing. Let me try to go to the next slide. Okay. So we'll start reading down here on the bottom on the left. They go on a tour, and E. Michael Jones is going on a tour in Mexico, and they go into this chapel or church or basilica or whatever it is where the Virgin's image is being kept. So realizing that I was not only a tourist, I moved closer to the altar to participate in the Mass. During the meditation after communion, I noticed an image of Our Lady of Guadalupe hanging high above the altar. In contemplating that image, which I had seen countless times before, I came to the realization that the Blessed Mother had accomplished in one miraculous moment what it had taken the Germans over 1,000 years to accomplish. The Blessed Mother, bearer of Logos incarnate, that's Jesus, right, had brought the Logos to the warring, disillusioned, and defeated tribes of Mexico, and had created out of this warring diversity one nation with a messianic mission. Mexico was the cosmic race, quote unquote. Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared as a mestiza, the mixture of European and Native American races. She was the cosmic symbol of the race mixing which the English had feared since the moment they had set foot on the soil of the New World. She was the symbol of Mexican identity. She was the symbol of Catholic race mixing and the antithesis of England's, and later America's, and still later Germany's, short-lived ideology of racial superiority. Now, you can go read Lev Gumilyov and look at his book Ethnogenesis in the Biosphere, and you can see that every nation or people that exists is a product of the mixture of prior nations and peoples. My friend, pointed this out, and it's easy to understand. If you look at the English, they're a mixture of the indigenous Stone Age population. They're a mixture of the later Celts who came, and their culture became very influential there, and people started speaking Celtic languages. Who knows what they were speaking before? Then you get Romans. Then you get the various Scandinavian/Germanic tribes. So that's who the English are. They're a mixture of all those peoples. However, the longer that a group of people stays in one place and only breeds with each other, the more alike they become. And the more uniform they become, and the more they begin to share each other's temperament and traits, and that's what creates a nation. If I go 3 towns over and I find a completely different group of people, they look different, they act different, they have a different viewpoint on the world, good luck trying to create any sort of lasting political structure. Good luck trying to create a uniform religious structure. It's simply not going to work. And this is why, the post-colonial period in Africa, partially why that stuff has been such a complete nightmare, is you have 200 tribes in one area, in one country. These people developed over, 10,000 years or 5,000 years in isolation, breeding within a small group. You have 200 of them. They don't speak the same languages. They don't resemble each other in many ways. They're all really different. So you're not going to be able to form a nation from those kind of people. On the other hand, in Europe, in a country like France or Germany, you might only have 2, 3, or 4 major groups, because there's been so much trade and commerce and movement over large areas that the people are generally similar to each other. Everybody knows that North and South Italy are very different from one another, but within North Italy, the differences are much less. So you can actually have some sort of lasting political and religious shared traits, viewpoints, commonalities, and everything else, something that it might take to create a nation. So the viewpoint that Jones is putting forward here is not completely ridiculous. But again, these are, what I'm saying is that this stuff would have happened over a period of hundreds or thousands of years. That's what would create a nation. This is saying that it happened instantaneously by the will of God and for the purposes of the church. So it's a supernaturally and divinely mandated race mixing in order to either create a new nation or to destroy enough of the differences between the Spanish and the Aboriginal population. And so, there's a lot to deal with here. There's a lot to deal with, and it's an interesting thought. Let's compare it to what we're going to see here about Europe. Starting off, Diego Duque, and there I missed David again. He's always hungry. Even though we're on our way to lunch, he demands a taco and eats it along the way as he explains his theories of racial and social biology. Twins separated at birth, theories of racial and social biology. I'm sorry, I messed that up and read it twice. Let me pause this and back it up. Okay, let's pick this up again, the next paragraph. He's always hungry. Even though we're on our way to lunch, he demands a taco and eats it along the way as he explains his theories of racial and social biology. Twins separated at birth, etc., etc., in an attempt to explain how biology undergirds, conditions, and determines our behavior. I remain unconvinced. Now, that's everything that we saw in the last video that it took an hour to look at. It doesn't matter how much evidence you adduce. It doesn't matter the quality of the evidence. You're never going to convince him on this issue about any of this stuff, the influence of any of it, for exactly the reasons that Michael Davies pointed out. I remain unconvinced. He then talks about being a European, which leaves me even less impressed, unsure of what he means of Europe. And I think we heard about this in one of the Tim Kelly interviews. Is Europe Nietzsche or St. Thomas Aquinas? Is it Mother Teresa or Lazar Kaganovich? We'll just stop there and we'll look at these arguments here. So we've got theories, we've got racial and social sociobiological theories, we've got twin studies. If you don't know what the important stuff with twin studies is, you can go look at the books that were written by Cyril Burt. He was alleged to have defrauded the scientific community in the world about his data on twin studies. It turns out that his enemies essentially destroyed his data soon after his death. They either hid or destroyed his data, and the correlations that were suspect from his twin studies have been reproduced later. So, there was this huge controversy, and they tried to destroy the man's legacy. They basically did destroy his legacy. But the important thing to learn from it is that if you take two children who are twins, okay, they're identical twins. Maybe they're even just fraternal twins in some cases. I'm sure it would be very similar. But if you take identical twins, you separate them at birth, they grow up in completely different circumstances, they exhibit much of the same behavior. And any reasonable person would have to conclude that this means that there are biological innate factors due to heredity that undergird, condition, and then determine is the strongest word, right? We would say influence. Of course, they would influence, condition, and undergird your behavior. Determine, that's the strongest. I remain unconvinced. Yes, of course. Of course he would be unconvinced. He then talks about being a European. And so this is the fallback position from trying to promote whiteness. If you say, I'm a white person, you're a white person, then what you'll inevitably get is, hey, where's the white gene? What's the white language? Why don't we get along anyway just because we're white? You get all these trash garbage arguments. So then you back it up a step and say, well, look, we're all Europeans. Our ancestors have lived in Europe for 20, 30, 40,000 years, and almost all of our ancestors are from Europe, and we share a lot of history, culture, language, DNA, blood, heredity, etc., with all these other people from Europe. What do you know? We build houses like Europeans. We have mating customs like Europeans. We look like them. We talk like them. We act like them. And then Dr. Jones says, which leaves me even less impressed. I'm unsure of what he means by Europe. Is Europe Nietzsche or St. Thomas Aquinas? Is it Mother Teresa or is it Lazar Kaganovich? Well, I can tell you, Lazar Kaganovich is not a European, all right? He is an outsider living in Europe, but he's not a European. If you take St. Thomas Aquinas, Nietzsche, and Mother Teresa, all three of them are Europeans. And if you compare all three of them to 3 random Nigerians or 3 random people from China or 3 random people from Russian Siberia or 3 random Australian Aborigines, they're going to be more closely related. They're going to resemble each other in many, many different ways, quantifiable ways, quantitatively, qualitatively. So these are just garbage arguments. Now, let's talk about the Virgin of Guadalupe herself. This is the divine, the Marian apparition, which supposedly is a mestiza and created the cosmic race through race mixing at the command of God, and instantly created a nation overnight, which couldn't be done in Germany for 1,000 years. These are just preposterous, just outrageous, ridiculous arguments. But let's look at her. Let's see. So this is the most high-quality image that I could find of the Virgin of Guadalupe. Is this a mestiza? Is this a European? Is this woman half Aboriginal? Let's compare her to Jose Antonio Primo de Rivera's sister. This is Jose Antonio Primo de Rivera was the son of Miguel Primo de Rivera, who was the dictator in Spain from, 23 to 1930, I think, something like that. And so Miguel Primo de Rivera was Spanish nobility, and his daughter is, part of that same ethnic and racial group. Now, maybe you can tell me if there's all that much of a difference between these two groups of people. Is this Aztec art or is this European art? I'm not sure. I tried to look up Aztec Mexica art, and most of what I found was stonework. To me, this looks like a European painting of a European woman, which would make sense if Christianity, as we understand it, Roman Catholicism, Rome is part of Europe. Probably 99% of Roman Catholics, up until especially the year in which this apparition occurred, would have been European peoples. So I'm not really seeing the mestiza. I'm not seeing it at all. Just to compare here, I've got a picture of what these are some mestizo people who are more on the indigenous side of things. You can see this woman almost looks like a North American Indian. Is this the Virgin of Guadalupe? Is this what we're looking at here? Or are we looking at something closer to Pilar Primo de Rivera? Now, another issue is that the Virgin in Spanish is often called morenita, which means little dark one. And it's been claimed, I've seen several places, that her skin tone implies that she is mixed race or mestiza. Well, I don't know how far we can get with that, because this Madonna from Częstochowa in Poland is a black Madonna and a black child, and this is obviously not having a lot to say about the racial characteristics of either the Virgin Mary or Jesus Christ. This is an artistic effect, and there are black Madonnas all over Europe, and I don't think it was ever claimed that this had something to say about the racial characteristic of the Holy Family. Now, another thing that's worth looking at is this genre called Costa paintings. And so Mexico was a very strange place in terms of racial identity, because they had indigenous Iberian people, Spanish, Portuguese. They had the Native Americans, the indigenes, and then they had black slaves brought from Africa. So you had these three groups. And so there was a lot of race mixing. But rather than, as Jones argues, there being like this master race of mestizo, which was created to become the new Mexican nation, the mestizos are only one small part of the overall tapestry of Mexican life. And so what they did was they would create these really complicated, this complicated caste structure, which starts out with Espanol and Indio. So the Indians and the Spanish, they create a mestizo. The mestizo and the Spanish create a castizo. So that's what you would call this is a mulatto, this is a quadroon. And the Castizo and the Española, they don't create an octoroon, they create a Spanish person. So they had all of these charts to go through and identify all of these different racial groups. And you can see that the way that they're dressed implies that there's something heavy here with social caste, because the people who are Español or Española, the men and women from Spain, who would be the peninsulares, I think they called them if they came directly from Spain or Portugal. And if they were full-blooded Spanish or people from the peninsula who were born in Mexico, then they would be peninsulares. Creoles. They call them criollos, I think. So peninsulares and creoles, those were the top two parts of the hierarchy. Mestizos were next, and then everybody else was below that. And you can see how they've dressed them here. The people who were mixed with Africans and the people who were more on the Indian side and not mixed so much with the Spanish, they're dressed in tattered clothing. They look like peasants, right? So there's a very clear distinction here in Mexican society between what your ethno-racial background is and the position you occupy. This is very different from the idea that the Virgin came and said, hey, we're going to create the new cosmic race. That's something that people read into history today, because Mexico is like 3/4 mestizo, 3/4 mixed between Spanish and indigenous American. And therefore, they're trying to build that identity up to both push out the people who still remain, who are Indians, the indigenous populations, and then also the full-blooded, like white Spaniards. So the mestizos don't really like either of those groups. And Dr. Jones' stuff about Masonic Mexico, that is a really big deal, and it is good to talk about that. And all of these racial politics totally get drawn into the Masonic stuff, exploits that horribly. And there were, sterilization programs and a lot of persecutions of indigenous people by mestizos and others who were Freemasons. Now, this one is, I guess, the most important one for me that I could find from these Costa paintings. This is a sort, we got a still life down here of all these old world and new world fruits. This is the mixing of the old and the new. We've got 2 rows here of the racial and caste mixing, the different groups, just like in the other painting, but not as complicated. And then we've got the Virgin of Guadalupe up here. She's overseeing the whole society. She's the patroness of Mexico, which is composed of these different racial and class groupings and all of the bountiful produce of the New World. Now, I can tell you how I know that she's not a mestizo, and it's because, I don't know, I can't blow this up anymore so that you can look at it. Maybe I can. Her face is blue. Can you see that? I'll put the link in the description. Her face is blue. This is La Morenita. This is the little dark one, the beloved little dark one. Can you see here that her skin color, this darkness, does not resemble any of the other people in this painting? They all have white, yellow, bronze, red, black skin, and her skin is blue. This is because she's supernatural. It doesn't have a damn thing with her to do with her being a mestiza or being mixed race. If it did, she would look just like someone in this painting, right? This is an artistic liberty. This is an artistic flourish that has been used in order to establish her status as a supernatural entity, as an apparition. So, if this argument about the Virgin being a mestiza is nonsense, where did it come from? When did it come about? How did Dr. Jones get this idea and that she was a mestiza, and that Mexico was ordained by God to be a mixed race country and therefore solve its social problems? So I'm going to pause this, bring up some more stuff to show you, and then we're going to get into the really dark stuff. And this is what I'm trying to say about him. He's got this distorted, false, incorrect, unsustainable, indefensible worldview about race, and therefore he has adopted this crackpot theory about the Virgin of Guadalupe and race mixing. And now we're going to see where that stuff comes from and why it's such a problem. So I left off saying that E. Michael Jones has given us this tale of the formation of the Mexican nation, which did not occur as an anthropological assessment of this would say that Mexico is still not even formed today because the Mexican identity is still fractured between the mestizo, the Spanish or European white, and the indigenous. So in that sense, it's sort of like America and many other New World countries in which it does not have a national identity. The story from the Virgin of Guadalupe, as told by Dr. Jones in his book Ethnos Needs Logos, is that the Virgin of Guadalupe appeared and boom, like that, the Mexican nation was created supernaturally overnight, and it's not really explained as to how this occurred, but it would occur through race mixing. That miscegenation, which is the fear of the perfidious Albion and the evil Nazi Germans. They all hate this stuff, but the Virgin showed us the way. And then we looked at these photos of various casta paintings and the Virgin herself, and we saw that she in fact is not depicted as a mestizo, and so there's no reason to think that she is a mestizo, or that either the apparition intended to present herself as such, or that the painter, if this is not a spiritual object, if it's just the creation of a secular artist, there's no reason to believe that the secular artist intended to depict the Virgin Mary, the Virgin of Guadalupe, as a mestizo. It's just not implied, and there's no meeting in the middle because the art style is totally European and the woman is depicted looking like a Spanish or Mediterranean European woman. So there's nothing mestizo about it. There's nothing about the meeting of the cultures in the middle. So I don't see it. And so if other people believe that this is the case, well then it had to come from somewhere. So where did this idea come from that that the Virgin of Guadalupe depicts a mestiza? Well, I did my research and I started to bring this idea back in time until I got to the origin of it. But we're going to start at the beginning. We're going to start at the last thing that I found and then move forward so that it's chronological, whereas doing the research, it went the other way. I found this radio message of Holy Father John the 23rd to the Second Trans-American Marian Congress. So in 1961, Pope John the 23rd gave an address over the Vatican radio to a group of Mariologists, or however you would call that, people in Latin America who were holding a Congress on the Virgin Mary. He gave this radio address, and in that, he said the following. This is going to be that now, in order to get the original text to this, you have to go to the Vatican website, but you have to go to the Spanish version. If you go to the English version, you won't find it, and there perhaps may be reasons for that. On October the 12th, 1961, he said, after the discovery of the New World, quote, the permanently holy Virgin Mary, Mother of the true God, through whom we live, poured out her tenderness and maternal care onto Tepeyac Hill, entrusting the Indian Juan Diego with roses that fell from his tilma, in which was the sweetest portrait uncreated by human hands. So that's just a retelling of the normal version of the Marian apparition. So there's this Indian. She appears to him. She says, "Do these certain things for me." They sort of negotiate it. He eventually does them. She creates some roses to prove that she has appeared to the local bishop. And in revealing those roses, she also puts her image onto the coat, the cloak, the cape of the Indian, and that is the icon, that's the relic that's revered today. So everything that John the 23rd has said so far in his radio address is standard. Now, the next paragraph says, this is how Our Lady desired to manifest in her office as mother. She, with a mestizo face, between the Indian Juan Diego and Bishop Zumarraga, as if to symbolize the kiss of two races. She, who asked to be known in Mexico under the title of Saint Mary of Guadalupe, an attractive and familiar name, to unite everyone in the same tender devotion. Saint Mary of Guadalupe, to forever be a symbol and architect of this fusion that would form Mexican nationality, and in an expansion loaded with meanings would travel beyond the borders of that country to offer to the whole world the magnificent choir of peoples who pray together in the Spanish language. So let's just read these key parts again. She with a mestizo face, the kiss of two races, and that the Virgin St. Mary of Guadalupe would be a symbol forever, an architect of this fusion that would form Mexican nationality. So this is the origin of these ideas. Now, who exactly is it that came up with this? Let's back up first, okay? So after I found this, I said, this is clearly the origin of these ideas. The origin of the idea that race mixing is the way to create the Mexican nationality, and that the Virgin of Mary not only approves of race mixing, but is embodying race mixing and suggesting it to the people. I said, this is crazy stuff. This is absolutely far out. And so I went back to the original source. I'm not going to try to pronounce this first two lines of this, but it's known under the title of the Nican Mopohua, which is the Nahuatl, I guess, for part of the legend about the Virgin of Guadalupe. This book was printed in 1649. It is presenting itself as a later codification of the legend and story. So it's saying, we're telling you exactly what happened at the time, we're just writing it down later. Now, I'll put links to this in the description, but this contains, I think, the oldest written testimony of the apparition and all the events surrounding it. The word mestiza or mestizo does not appear in the text. The word race does not appear in the text. The word Indian appears in the text, particularly referring to Saint Juan Diego, who is the Indian to whom Mary appeared. There is nothing whatsoever in this text that says anything about races, race mixing, mestizos, mestizas, or any of that kind of stuff, or even Mexican nationality. It's totally absent. And so if it doesn't appear in the original text, and I can't find it anywhere else before 1961, it seems to me that we're looking at a product of John the 23rd. Now, who was this guy? Pope Pius XII, Eugenio Pacelli, died in 1958, and he was succeeded by Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli. Roncalli was the son of a peasant family in northern Italy, and he entered the Catholic Church, or entered the seminary, he entered the seminary to become a priest, and while he was there, he was associating with other seminarians who had modernist tendencies. And I won't go through all of his history because there's already an excellent lecture online by the independent traditionalist Catholic Bishop Sanborn. So you can go look up John the 23rd and Sanborn, and I'm sure you'll find his excellent 30-minute description of Roncalli and about how I think it's like Pope Pius X and Roncalli were both beatified, I think, on the same day, which Sanborn says is, totally is essentially a Luciferian joke by the modern church hierarchy to do that. And the reason he says this is because when Roncalli was in seminary, he was associated with a couple other guys who were modernists, and those were his close friends. After that, in the 1920s, he was an anti-fascist and very friendly to the socialists in Italy. When he was, and of course, after 1922, you're under Mussolini. So this young father Roncalli was an anti-fascist, anti-Mussolini. Because he created so many problems with his anti-Mussolini tendencies and his political activism, he was more or less banished from Italy, couldn't come back. And so he spent time in Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey, and France. Basically, until 1945, he was not to be found in Italy. He was to be found in one of those four countries. Now, there's an accusation that I couldn't trace down that says that in 1935, Father Roncalli was inducted into the Grand Orient Lodge system in Paris in 1935. 1935 was, I think, the time in which he was banished from Bulgaria and then sent to Greece and Turkey. He was sent to Greece and Turkey from Bulgaria because he was too friendly with the Orthodox. He had adopted this ecumenist approach in which he said that there's really no difference between Orthodox Christianity and Catholicism, and there shouldn't be any barriers between them. Now, of course, that those two churches have animosity and have doctrinal differences. So to say this, he was going against all of the traditionalists, conservatives, hardliners, and doctrinaires of the Catholic Church. And so they removed him from that position and sent him to Greece and Turkey. And it didn't seem to have any effect because he had great love for the Muslims in Turkey as well. And the allegation is that in 1935, which is when he went to Turkey, he was inducted into the Grand Orient Lodge of French Grand Orient. So this is who we're dealing with. And then in 1958, let's back up a second. In 1940, World War II has begun. And so from 1940 to 1944, still in Turkey, he uses his all of his assets to get Jews out of Western Europe through Turkey on diplomatic passports. And at least from this period onward, one of his goals is to get all quote-unquote anti-Semitic Catholic doctrine out of the church and make room for Judaism as a separate faith outside the Catholic Church, to say that Jews do not have to convert, and to get rid of the Catholic doctrine that says that there's a problem with Judaism. And so his ecumenism mutates again and takes on this new form. So he's getting rid of the age-old Catholic doctrine that says there's only salvation through Jesus Christ and that the one true church is the Catholic Church itself. And part of the doctrine coming out of Vatican II is that the Catholic Church is an expression of the Church of Christ, but is not the sole Church of Christ. And so that idea was present long before Vatican II, and Roncalli was one of these guys who believed in that. Now, starting from 1944, I think, maybe from 44 to 53, something like that, he is the nuncio, the how would you say, the papal diplomat in Paris. And while he's in Paris, he's hanging out with some old friends. This is Roncalli after he's become Pope. But while he's in Paris, he's hanging out with a bunch of interesting people, like this guy. This is Leon Blum. Leon Blum was a prime minister of France in the 1930s. This is Leon Blum again. He was a prime minister of France in the 1930s, and then again in the post-war period, they kind of dug him up and put him back in there under the Allied occupation, essentially. Now, the interesting thing about Leon Blum is that he was not only a Jew, as you could tell from this Hebrew monument, which is on a kibbutz in Israel. He was a Freemason. And in the 19-teens and 20s, he was involved in the newspaper La Humanité, which was essentially a Jewish Freemasonic project that was promoting socialism and anarchism, just general sort of far-left Marxist type stuff. People called it anarchistic, but I think it was really just straight far-left Marxist garbage, right? Now, Leon Blum himself was a Marxist, like I said, was a Jewish Freemason, and this is one of Roncalli's friends that he's hanging out with. And there's a bunch of other aspects to this as well, but we'll just move on. I think you kind of get the idea where we're going here. So then, as I said, in 1961, this guy, Roncalli, you can read a lot more about him, find out more of the criticisms. In 61, he makes that radio message to Mexico where he brings up this race mixing stuff that seems so out of left field and very strange and unattested in the original text, and also just from looking at the art itself. Roncalli, John the 23rd, is the guy who calls the Vatican II conference. When he calls that conference, he also brings back a whole group of modernist theologians who had been completely on the outs under Pope Pius XII. So up until 1958, these guys had essentially been exiled. When the Vatican II conference gets called, these guys get brought back and they start to influence the doctrine. So if you've got problems with Vatican II or the direction of the church that since then, you have to lay a huge part of this blame on the door of Roncalli, who has all these very strange associations. He's an anti-fascist. He's almost certainly a Freemason. He wants to change Catholic doctrine with regards to the Jews specifically. So this is the smoke of Satan in the Vatican, basically, is what I'm saying. Now, it doesn't stop with Roncalli. Karol Wojtyła, or however you say Pope John Paul II's name, he issues in 1999 an apostolic exhortation to America, and in it he says, quote, "The appearance of Mary to the native Juan Diego on the hill of Tepeyac in 1531 had a decisive effect on evangelization. Its influence greatly overflows the boundaries of Mexico, spreading to the whole continent." That's exactly what John the 23rd said. America, which historically has been and still is a melting pot of peoples, has recognized in the mestiza face of the Virgin of Tepeyac, quote, "in Blessed Mary of Guadalupe, an impressive example of a perfectly enculturated evangelization, end quote. Consequently, not only in Central and South America, but in North America as well, the Virgin of Guadalupe is venerated as Queen of all America. So there's more here, but there's a lot of stuff about the enculturation, which is one of these buzzwords from Vatican II that essentially says that you can change the historical doctrine and dogma of the Church to anything else if you think that it will appeal to the masses. That's kind of what I get out of it. And then let's see, I got one more small section here. In America, the mestiza face of the Virgin of Guadalupe was from the start a symbol of the enculturation of the gospel. So that's what we're talking about here. You're gonna be able to get to the people through race mixing and through the mestiza phase. So these are how these ideas are changing over time. One of the funny citations for this text here, Ecclesia in America, where these quotes are taken from, when I was looking through that, I saw Avery Dulles, which was John Foster Dulles' son, who became a Jesuit and then I think a cardinal deacon or something like that. So you can just see how in the Cold War and later, the American deep state, the New World Order, they just bought their way in. They took that wedge of Vatican II, they bought their way into the hierarchy, and now you're finding Dulles family members writing about, race mixing is going to be the way to bring people to the Catholic Church. So it's just this is far out there stuff. Now, the third thing we need to talk about in this list is Dr. E. Michael Jones, because he comes in 2015. We're not going to go through all that again. And then the fourth thing is the Bishop of El Paso, Mark J. Seitz. And he wrote on this website, which you see here, we got like a border wall, we got some Native American people dancing around, some Mexicans, some Hispanics, whatever. You got like some white liberals or something like that. And he wrote, he's the Bishop of El Paso, by the way. And so after that shooting, which have some things to say about that, but I'm not going to because I don't want to get banned on YouTube quite as fast as that. Paragraph 52, I'll put links to all these, of course, in the description. This is from Mark Seitz, the Bishop of El Paso, 2019. Her simple message persuades us, as it did that day on Tepeyac, that she is the God-bearer, Theotokos. Only a woman such as this young brown mestiza empress, born on the edges of empire, and who revealed herself anew on the edges of empire, could have convinced our people of the nearness and tenderness of God. This is all the exact same stuff that came out of the 1961, right? The tenderness, the nearness, except now we have post-colonialism, right? The edges of empire, the third world, the global south. So it's the same core from 1961. It's just picking up new pieces of trash along the way as this ball of filth rolls downhill. She who shares in our in-betweenness, our transness, right? She is the mestiza who takes what is noble from each culture, elevates it, and points out new ways towards reconciliation. She takes on our people's pain and trauma and transforms it to give birth to hope and redemption. So the Bishop of El Paso, Mark Seitz, he's employing this Kalergian type language in which you say we're gonna perform this race mixing, and then the new man, the man of the future, is going to be better than the man of the old times, because the new man is going to have only the best characteristics of the race mixing. We're not going to get the worst characteristics. We're not going to be just as good as we were. We're going to be better. We're going to be better through race mixing. Now, for the strangest thing of all, okay, I accidentally turned the recording off, so let's try to do the last part again. Now, the worst of all, I think, is that in 2019, December the 12th, the current Pope, Pope Francis, gave a homily at the Vatican specifically about the Virgin of Guadalupe and also took a pot shot at his detractors, who are no doubt the traditional Catholics, right-wing, conservative Catholics in the United States, who publish a lot of anti-Vatican II, anti-modernist, and anti-Francis material. So in his mind, the Virgin of Guadalupe and what she stands for is directly opposed to all of the efforts that traditional Catholics would be familiar with in trying to root out the pederasty, the homosexuality, the corruption, and the modernism in the church, because all those things go together, as you would know if you read or listen to people talk about this. It's all related and can't be pulled apart. So I'm going to try to give a rough translation of some of the key parts of this homily that he gave, and we'll just listen or watch him talk a little bit while I do that. He says, Mary is mother and woman and mestiza. And the word mestiza, it can mean either miscegenation or just mixed, depending on the context. But when we're talking about this, we're deliberately talking about, or we're specifically talking about race mixing. That's the idea behind mestiza here. So I'm going to say miscegenation to distinguish. The third adjective I would like to say when looking at her is mixed. She was mixed, she was miscegenated, not only with little Juan Diego, but with the people. She was miscegenated to be the mother of all. She was miscegenated with humanity. Why? Because she miscegenated with God. And that is the great mystery. Mother Mary miscegenates with God, creating true God and true man in the form of her Son. And then this is his criticism of the traditionalists. When they come to us with stories that this has to be declared or that has to be declared, this dogma or that dogma, let's not get lost in nonsense. Mary is a woman. She is Our Lady. Mary is the mother of her Son and of the Holy Mother Church. And Mary is miscegenated, mestiza, woman of our peoples, but who miscegenated with God. Let her speak to us as she spoke to Juan Diego from these three titles, with tenderness, with feminine warmth, and with the closeness of miscegenation. So be it. And so in the mind of this guy, who I think is rooted, at least halfway in liberation theology, which is a fusion of Marxist, cultural Marxism with a religious faith, it's got some outward appearances of Christianity or Catholicism, but at heart it's really trying to create the utopia on earth through egalitarianism. And this is the link between E. Michael Jones and this dogma, is that Dr. Jones doesn't want to believe in race. He's looking past the truth. And when you look past the truth, like Michael Davies said, okay, if you believe in your religion, if you believe in your church, then you can't be scared of the truth. There's nothing to cover up. The truth will always reveal the truths of your religion. They're synonymous. There's not multiple truths. There's just one. And so if you're unwilling to look at race, if you're unwilling to look at the scientific evidence and meet it head on, and you're instead going to go somewhere else, you're going to have to pick up some stuff that's been put there by other people. And in this case, E. Michael Jones, because of his inability, unwillingness to tackle the race stuff head on, and instead ignoring everything that the anthropologist and sociologist and race realist, racialist, ignoring all their evidence and saying, as the quote was from his book, "I'm not convinced, I'm less convinced." There's no direct response to these points. The twin studies, the DNA studies, the genetics, the quantitative psychology, the psychometrics, all this stuff, there's no response to any of that. It's just, I don't believe it. Well, if you don't believe that, then you have to have other explanations for things. And what are they going to be? They're going to come from people like Roncalli, John Paul II, this guy, and they're going to say that, miscegenation creates the new race, which is better than the old race, and it brings us closer to God. Compare that with something like Lev Gumilyov, which says that nations are created over hundreds or thousands of years as a result of natural processes. There's a period initially when race mixing occurs for important historical reasons, and then there's a long period of isolated breeding in which you do create a new population, which now the individuals in it resemble each other, and therefore there's a uniformity of temperament, preferences, desires, attitudes, and therefore they create a stable identity. Rather than this stuff, which is just the attempt to break down everything that is old in order that the raw human material can be reshaped to their desires. And that is straight out of the French Revolution, or it's straight out of hell if you believe in Lucifer. And the goal is not spiritual attainment, but material, worldly utopia. And that's ultimately what's behind egalitarianism. All right. Thank you for joining me on this project. It's taken a long time to get to this point. I'll talk to you again soon.